Hi, I'm Shoestring Jay and welcome back to my channel where I talk about all things thrifty, frugal and money saving. And today I'm in a bit of a funny mood. I read something on Facebook from somebody I used to know very well and used to consider a friend, but in recent years I have kind of deliberately moved away from because she's somebody who's very motivated by money and very judgmental of people who haven't attained the level of success that she and her family have, and obviously that being me. So I've kind of felt like I had nothing in common with her, and I'm not motivated by money in the same way. I like to have enough money. I'm very fortunate that I have a house and I have my health and I have enough to feed myself, and there's not much left at the end of the month, but I know that I am privileged, and I appreciate that I am privileged, and a lot of people don't have that level of privilege that I've got. However, this ex-friend, let's call her Joanne, just for the sake of having a name, put something that she had copied and pasted, but I know she agrees with every word, on Facebook, which just made me so angry that I had to unfriend her, because I thought I can't get into a conversation about this because the lack of empathy is just staggering, and I don't think I could get through that lack of empathy really. So I'll give you a little gist of it. So she says she worked hard. She didn't inherit her job or her income. You might have seen this because it's a copy paste thing, so she didn't actually write this. She made many sacrifices to get where she got, where she is today. She's tired of being told she has to spread the wealth to people who don't have her work ethic. And I will say that when I knew her, I was working part-time and she was working part-time, and both bringing up children. So it's not like she was working like a 90-hour week or anything at any point during when I have known her. She's fed up giving her money to people who have sacrificed nothing and feel entitled to receive everything. Tired of having to give her money away to people who are too lazy to earn it. And this is that kind of assumption that some people make, that if you are receiving benefits of any kind, then you are lazy. You have other options, but you choose not to take them. That you are work shy, or you are somehow fiddling the system, and that's the case generally. Not that that's the case for just a few people, but that is what people like Joanne are working for, to fund those lazy, feckless people who choose not to go and get a decent job and could try to attain the lifestyle that she has. I should also say at this point that she had a university education when university was free, completely free in the UK. I mean, when I grew up, I could have gone to university for nothing, and that is one of the big regrets in my life, that I didn't go to university and I did other things. But, it was completely free. So anybody could go to university if they wanted to. So it wasn't always that easy still in those days to get in a good university if you came from a humble background, if you didn't have the right school and the right schools, or if you hadn't had the right encouragement from your teachers and help, or you hadn't gone to a grammar school, and it's hard to get into a grammar school if you didn't have the right kind of coaching to get through the exam. But she did have that, so she had that advantage, and that is a privilege. And I think you have to realise, if you're in that position, that is a real privilege that a lot of people don't get, particularly now. So people who moan about youngsters, millennials and beyond spending their money on coffees and going out and eating out and that kind of thing should kind of bear that in mind, really. And she also bought her first house when houses, you could get a house for 2 and 6, I'm joking, obviously, but I've said before, in the 90s, late 80s, me and my then husband bought our first house and it cost us £39,000, and we could get 100% deposit. So we were rubbish with money. We didn't save anything towards a deposit, and the bank just said, oh yeah, that's fine. You can have a mortgage for that. So that is a privilege. So she also grew up in this time, and everybody knows that's not the case now. So sorry, I'm just looking at some notes of what she said. So she's tired of people who don't take responsibility for their lives and actions, especially those who want me to fund it. You have the choice to work, to stay off drugs, a choice to make something of yourself. So it's like the black and white thinking is that if you don't work, then you're probably a drug addict. Not that maybe you're not working because you were struck down with an awful illness and you can't work anymore, or because you perhaps gave birth to a child with severe disabilities and they need constant care, so you cannot go out to work. All of those things that can really hit anybody, and actually your life can fall apart in an instant. She's not experienced any of that. So, but she still says, and this is somebody who I have to say was an NHS GP for many, many years and now just works as a private doctor. She must have seen a lot of addiction in her time. Babies that were born addicted, and people who came from a really rough and difficult background where the culture was to take drugs, or they felt so hopeless that drugs gave them a moment where they didn't feel miserable about their lives, and then they became addicted, or they didn't realise that, they didn't have the education to realise that actually by taking certain drugs just a couple of times you could be addicted, or who have been manipulated into taking drugs by other people who wanted to use them for various things. You hear about these things, all the grooming gangs that got these young girls addicted so that they could then manipulate them and tell them they needed to pay off their debts, their drugs debts and things like that. So obviously it's worst case scenarios, but I'm just saying there are so many circumstances where people who come from a very comfortable background, even if they were originally from a working class background and their parents had kind of brought them up, and then which is the case here, the parents had achieved a good level of income and therefore they were able to go to university, didn't have to go out to work at 16 because they needed to contribute to the family finances and that kind of thing. It made me really angry that you get this kind of unempathetic and attitude from somebody who will actually copy and paste this and put it on Facebook to everybody she knows, and like shamelessly really. And I know she thinks I'm a mad lefty, but I think I'm quite sort of centrist really. And I just think you have to look after your citizens, and you have to look after the people who have misfortunes in their life, and you have to look after your elderly. And I love the NHS. I think it's great. I think it's underfunded, but it is amazing. And I look at other countries where they don't have a health system like we have, and they go bankrupt, like in America, go bankrupt trying to pay medical bills. We are very, very fortunate that we don't have that here. So as I say, I'm very appreciative of having the NHS. And the welfare state was set up in the UK at a time when people were really hungry. The 1920s, 1930s, worldwide, not just in the US, there was a depression. And there was a case that I read about recently where a mother in London, mother of 7, whose husband was just on a pittance that they paid for unemployment at the time, went without food to feed her children and just collapsed and died. And she died of pneumonia, but they said that it was really caused by malnutrition. And there were lots of cases. I mean, George Orwell went up to the north of England and wrote the road to Wigan Pier all about the awful poverty that people were living in at that point. And the welfare state was a reaction to that situation where the government of the time recognised that they needed to look after their citizens and make sure that everybody had enough, everybody had enough to eat. So the basic level of care for everybody. So, and that is a good thing for a civilised society, isn't it? Not just people doing really, really well for themselves and then making the assumption that everybody else who's not doing as well is just lazy. And it's not the case, is it? I mean, even now you've got people who are working 2 jobs and still not doing well because everything's gone up so much. I mean, that's not because they're lazy. And when I was working for the council, there were people there who were working in the contact centre where I worked who had families and earned so little that they had to top up their wages with working tax credits. So they weren't being lazy. They were working for an underfunded council who couldn't afford to pay their employees much. So, that makes me angry, that kind of that lack of understanding. And I also grew up, so I didn't grow up with lots of money, but I had a house, I had food, I had two parents, and my dad always had a job. My mum usually had a part-time job. We had enough. We never had any excess, but we had enough. And I had friends who I couldn't believe their circumstances, because I always thought of us as being quite poor. And then we moved to a different area, and it was quite an upmarket area, but we were still obviously the same. And I had two friends in particular. So none of this was their fault. One of my friends, her mother had left when she was 4. Her dad had serious alcohol problems. He just had a breakdown after her mum left. He had 2 children to support. He lost his job. And he was on some sort of disability, whatever you got in those days. I'm talking sort of 70s, really, mid-70s, early 80s. And I remember seeing him going through the bins at the back of the co-op, pulling out cans, and they used to pull out cans. The cans used to go in the bin if the labels had fallen off. And so they didn't know what they were going to get for their dinner, and it could have been cat food or it might have been a can of beans. And she used to laugh about it, but you could tell that it was not funny. It wasn't funny. And the times that she'd come round and she'd just have dinner with us because there wasn't much food there. And there was no mum there. My mum helped her out with a few issues because there was no mother figure in her life. And she went on to have a child really, really young. She got pregnant really young. She got married really young. And I think she was trying to create stability for herself that she never had growing up. But that marriage didn't work. She wasn't really compatible. She married too young. Her husband turned out to be a drunk. He used to hit her. And none of this was her fault. This was not her fault. She ended up running away from him, and she did get some money finally when they actually did have a house, and she was entitled to some of the house. He diddled her out of 50% of the house, and she ended up getting a third. So it wasn't enough to buy anything. So she said, right, I'm going to do a course because she was only educated to O-level at the time, which would be GCSE now. And she went off and did a secretarial course, and she spent quite a lot of money on this course. But then she tried to get jobs and realised that actually none of the secretarial jobs that she was trying to go for could cover her rent, her food and her childcare. So having really tried really hard to put herself in a position where she could be employed, she found that she couldn't. So she ended up not doing that and going on what was social security then. So her children grew up in a council flat with a mum who was on social security. Not their fault, not her fault. Circumstances, she didn't have a good start in life. So the other friend, her dad was another violent thug she was one of, I think, 9 children, mainly boys. And her mother had agoraphobia. And when I met her, she missed school all the time. And the truancy officers used to be taking her mum to court. And I couldn't understand why she kept missing school because she was a really bright girl, And then we became very good friends, and she told me she missed school because her mum had agoraphobia, and she also had, as well as being afraid to go out, she was afraid of being alone. So she had 2 very young children, but she would keep my friend or her brother at home from school because she didn't want to be by herself with the 2 little children. So she had severe mental health illnesses, not their fault. The dad was in prison. Every now and then he'd come back for a bit, impregnate her mum again and then clear off again. And so she was living on social security. And I remember they had broken windows in their house, and they were just always broken, and there was no one there to mend them, and I couldn't understand it. They were freezing in the winter, had no heating. My friend there was no hot water. She had to have a wash. She had boil kettles and have a wash at the kitchen sink in a house full of boys. She had no clothes. She was really literally lived in rags. She was on free school meals, but she was hungry all the time. So again, she was another one that my mum and dad used to feed quite a lot. And I remember saying to her, look, you've got to put yourself first and, go to school and try and get some O-levels and try and get a good job, and then you can help, you know, you can help your mum, or you can get out of it. And it's really, I like to think I had an influence because, you know, my own education, I only went to A level, but she did do that. And then she went and she got a job as a trainee bookkeeper, and she had a really good job. I haven't been in touch with her for about 15 years, 20 years, but she had a really good job. She never had a family of her own, but she had her own house and she had a really good career, and she did help her mum out, and she'd gone the other way and she'd really pulled herself up by her bootstraps. So, but you know, what was the difference between them? They both had awful home situations, and they both tried, and one of them succeeded and the other one didn't. So it's like, this is what makes me angry, because I've seen that firsthand, and I know that neither of those people, and not their mum, the mum or the dad involved in this case, they weren't lazy and feckless. They were unfortunate. They didn't have breaks, and it does make me really angry that people take that attitude and don't have any empathy for other people. And I don't doubt that there are people that play the system. I know that there are. I know one family in particular I know personally, and the parents were really great at playing the benefits system so that none of them ever had to work. And now their children are really great at it. They're all just young adults now, and they are really good. They get everything they can go. They've got flats given to them, and they've got, you know, they don't work. They've been like students forever and that kind of thing. And I know that this kind of thing goes on. And I know there are people that are out and out fraudulent. And I do believe that you have to have some safeguards in place for the people that will take advantage of the system. Absolutely. But I do think that the rest of us do have to pay our way as well. You know, we have to, those of us that can afford to pay our taxes. And if that means, you know, if I was on a higher tax bracket, I would accept that I have to pay more, because that's only fair, and that's how I feel about it. This ex-friend, clearly one of the things she was ranting about was the fact that she was being asked to pay more all the time. Well, she's on a very, very high income with her husband's something in the city now. He's absolutely loaded to the point where she only, I think as far as she works, maybe one day a week, if that, and privately as a GP. And he is on massive money. They own 3 houses, and one of them is like a stately home with a pool and everything. And they are very motivated by money, and which I've never understood, because I've never been motivated by money. I've only been motivated by having enough money, and I've not been motivated by status or anything like that. And they are very judgmental of people that they don't perceive to be as successful as them, which is why I stopped seeing them, because I very much felt that I fell into that category. And, you know, it's not nice being judged by people who are supposed to be your friends. So I've moved away from that. But this today just made me want to come on and have a little bit of a rant, really, because, well, I think I've explained how I feel about that. And the other thing I would say is, if you feel strongly about social issues, and if you think that your country is not treating the poor people of the country fairly, then go and have a little look at Gary's Economics. He's a channel that's just exploded and taken off, and I watch him and I hear myself just going, yes, Gary for Prime Minister, because, you know, the odds are stacked against lots of people. It's not a level playing field. There are a tiny number of very rich people who are accumulating lots of wealth at the expense of other people, and I just don't think it's fair. So I'd love to know your comments. Keep it civil. I know that we all disagree, and some of you will probably agree with my ex-friend Joanne. So, you know, I understand that. I understand that this is just my opinion, and I've erred more politically than I normally would in my videos, but it was just something I felt strongly about, so I thought I'd put it out there. Anyway, I'd love to hear your comments, as long as I say you keep it civil. And if you enjoyed this video, give me the thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and I will see you on Wednesday for some more frugal food. Bye for now.